So as I'm writing the script for this video, I just finished recording the voiceover for Return to Skylands episode 2, and because of that, I'm probably going to be pretty busy over the next few days. I mean, I'm already animating / visualizing the video, and I was stuck on finding a goddamn room for about 2 days, so I think it's best that I tackle some pretty easy stuff for now. And after doing a little bit of thinking, I would realize something interesting about the cores that I'm surprised I didn't realize sooner. As weird as it sounds, new cores kinda completely vanished after Skylanders Trap Team. It's kinda just gimmicks after that, which also made me realize another thing as well. I don't think the cores from Trap Team are talked about all that much. I mean, the Trap gimmick is basically 2 separate gimmicks smushed into one, the Skylanders and the Traptanium gates / crystals, and the villain traps themselves, so it would be obvious that a lot of the cores from that game would be brushed over. But interestingly enough, like Swap Force, I've damn near covered almost all of them, and because of that, I decided to do what I did last week, but instead do it with Trap Team Skylanders. And instead of it being just a handful like in Swap Force, there's actually 5 left, so I had to put a little bit of thought into this. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to take a look at some of Skylander Trap Team's last remaining cores. So with all of that said and done, let's talk about today's Skylanders.
No rest for the wicked.
Now, when it comes to the 3 vampires that have existed within the Skylanders group, which I'm kind of surprised on because I thought there were more, I'm pretty sure that Batspin is probably the least recognized out of all of them, and it's probably because the other 2 kind of just have things about them that overshadow her a bit. Roller Brawl is not only regarded as one of the best hit-and-run Skylanders throughout the history of the franchise, but Night Shift has the ability to revive himself. And it's not like it's the final upgrade, no, this is one of the earlier upgrades. But this doesn't mean that Batspin is lacking. In fact, I like her design a lot more than most of you probably think. Her design is actually really good. The color scheme is not only visually appealing, as the grays and cherry red of her suit and the baby blue of her skin work surprisingly well, along with the yellow eyes that act as a contrast, but the outfit itself is a little more complex than I originally thought. She not only has these gray vibrances, but the huge bat ears on the top of her head kind of imply to me at least that they're actually the same bat wings that she uses when she transforms, since they are located in the same spot and they look the same to the wings that her mini bats have. But before I jump into her backstory and sift through it like we usually do, she has a rather insane history before the game that I just have to talk about. Unlike other Skylanders, Batspin's moveset was actually created before she was designed, and the moveset would be created by Nat Lowe like many other Skylanders, who knew that he wanted to make a female vampire type of character as he was intrigued by the idea of a character using their projectiles after they were fired. Due to how Batspin's bats made her attacks more effective, she would eventually become one of Nat's favorite works, but there would be one hiccup during all of this. By his own admission, her first path made her so insane and broken that he made the second path completely pointless. But he just added baths to the second path and everything was pretty much fixed. For him, she had become a new bar to aspire to for Skylanders upgrades. But what makes this even crazier is that she didn't get her official name from him or anyone else on the team. Batspin was originally part of a Frito-Lay competition alongside Flipwreck and High Five for their names, and because of this, she got her name from a girl by the name of Kimberly Josie. So with that out the way, let's take a look at her backstory and see what we can learn. To fully learn about her history, we have to go all the way back to her childhood in the Skylands underworld, specifically the moment that she was separated from her people when she was still rather young. She would spend months trying to search for them, but to no avail. But all wasn't lost for her, as she was eventually found and welcomed into a colony of magical bats that raised her as one of their own. Many years would go by, and one day the colony would be attacked by a group of undead trolls who were set on stealing the bat's magic to create a sonic weapon. But Batspin wasn't having any of that. She quickly took the trolls on, and using her powerful abilities that she had learned from growing up with the bats and basically becoming one of them, she would heroically defeat the trolls and save the whole colony. The news of this would eventually make its way to Eon, like it usually does, and he would go and seek her out. And eventually, she would become a Skylander a short time after. Now, I think the most interesting aspect about her backstory is that it doesn't mention if she was a vampire prior to getting lost, which makes me wonder if she was something else prior to being found by the bats. Yes, she came from the underworld, but it wouldn't be that far of a stretch to say that she could have been something else, since it implies in her backstory that she was converted. And that's kind of a vampire's whole stick. Not to mention how one of her abilities is to turn into a massive bat and almost her entire lower half is made of bats. Another thing that I've been wondering is how old is Batspin? Bat Spin. And by this, is she like a teenager or is she an adult? Because it never really says how old she was when she was found, and we don't really have exact numbers. But I'm pretty sure that she's a young adult since it said in her backstory that she lived with them for many years. But another question I have is, how does her bats work exactly? Now, what I mean by that is not these bats, I'm talking about these bats that replace her legs, because I genuinely wonder what exactly is going on here. I mean, I can't really tell if it's a swarm of bats that make up her lower half, or it's just a storm of some sort with a couple of bats in it. Not to mention how instead of extending outwards like you think it would when she's falling, it starts to sharpen like a pencil. So she must have some sort of control over it. But with that out the way, let's get into the next Skylander of today.
Making waves!
Now, when it comes to Skylanders I've seen from Trap Team, I'm pretty sure that Flipwreck is one of the weirdest designs that I have seen from this game, specifically because they literally slapped arms and legs onto a dolphin and kinda called it a day. Well, I'm kinda just exaggerating on that, they put a crapload of effort into his design, but I just can't shake off how uncanny he looks. So I tried digging into his development to see if there was any reasons on why he looked this way, and surprisingly, I wasn't really able to find anything except for the fact that he was also one of the Frito-Lay Skylanders, and he was named by a boy named Noel Foster. So with all of that said and done, let's take a look at his backstory and see what we can learn. Before Flipwreck was a Skylander, he was one of the many dolphins who resided in Bottlenose Bay. Most of the dolphins who resided there spent most of their days playing in the waves, but Flipwreck had a completely different calling compared to the rest of his kin. He was very adventurous compared to the other dolphins he lived with, and he decided to self-appoint himself as the protector of his undersea world. And one day, while he was exploring a underwater graveyard of ships, he stumbled upon a massive ice Viking ship that was surprisingly still intact. And it was intact for a reason. A huge crew of ice Vikings would suddenly burst from the inside of the ship and immediately began to lead an attack against the dolphin residents. Flipwreck knew that he had to do something to protect his home, so he quickly rushed off and fashioned together armor, a shield, and a sword using the piece of nearby shipwrecks before heading off and single-handedly defeating the ice Vikings and sending them packing. After this event, Flipwreck would go on to become a Skylander, and his history kinda just stops here. But before we get into my other questions about his backstory, you know, I know, and I'm pretty sure everyone else knows at this point about what we learned about Zap when we talked about him. And that makes me wonder what his thoughts about Flipwreck are. I mean, it's literally impossible for us to figure this out because, well, the franchise is kinda dead right now and I can't find Flipwreck anywhere in the extended media. Another thing that I want to ask is, were the Ice Vikings working with someone exactly? Now, I know that it sounds like a weird question, but from how it's phrased here, it makes it sound like there was a third party involved. But to be perfectly honest with you, this is probably just a typo that I'm reading too deep into. But with all of that said and done, let's get into the final Skylander of today.
The main event!
Now, when it comes to the Skylanders I've seen so far, I'm pretty sure that Trailblazer is the only real time where I honestly don't really care about a Skylander's design. And this isn't a diss, it's just that I don't really care about this one. And I honestly don't exactly know why. I have seen a crapload of Skylanders that most of us would probably see as more generic than him, but for some odd reason his design is just not really clicking for me. The only thing that really stands out to me is that his armor is gunmetal gray. But with that said and done, I think that it's about time that I jump into his backstory to see if I could find anything cool. Before he was a Skylander, he was your average unicorn who had a rather fiery temper, and it would really flare up whenever he witnessed or came across something unfair. And one day, he would come across something that was really unfair. What Trailblazer had found was a unicorn trapped in a net, but this wasn't just any unicorn. This was an Unocorn, a magical creature that sprinkled enchanted cinnamon throughout Skylands, and he would quickly free the creature from the trap. After some time, the dark wizards who made the trap in the first place would return to see if they caught anything. But they were absolutely livid to see that their plan to catch the Unocorn had been thwarted. But Trailblazer was readier than ever to fight them. Turns out the spicy cinnamon from the churro horn had somehow rubbed off on him and mixed with his natural affinity for fire. So he was literally set alight with fury, running fiery circles around the wizards and forcing them to flee and never return. He would soon realize that he could use his new abilities to fight evil all across Skylands, so he would seek out the Skylanders and eventually become one of them, and he would go on to be a main character in one of the Skylanders comic books called Champions. Now, I think most of us can already tell that this story is really damn juicy due to the fact that the unicorn is a part of it, because the unicorn is a massive aspect of Pinata's backstory. And what's interesting about the unicorn's appearance is that it seems to have happened after the unicorn went missing in Pinata's backstory. Now, the reason I say this is because this is probably what happened to the unicorn after he disappeared in Pinata's eyes, as it seemed like the two were close to each other most of the time, and the one time that they weren't caused all of this to happen, which makes me wonder if the unicorn is still looking for his best friend, and it would be tragic if that was the case. But before we go, I would like to talk about his appearance in the Champions comic book, because I just really don't like how these three are represented in the book. I'm not going to say anything about Fistbump because, well, I haven't read their backstory yet, but when it comes to Fling Kong and Trailblazer, their depictions just feel so off to me, almost like a disconnect happened somewhere. Trailblazer was treating Deja Vu unfairly, which goes against what his backstory sets up. And for Fling Kong, even though in hindsight this doesn't really screw with how he's depicted in his backstory, it still just rubs off the wrong way for me. If I had to rewrite this story, I would have written it in a way where Trailblazer wasn't as mean to Deja Vu and had somewhat reprimanded Fling Kong and Fistbump for not treating her fairly, as it's clearly something very important for his character, and just not notice how she's feeling in the moment. But with that said and done, I think it's about time that I wrap this up. Now, before I go, I'd like to apologize if I sound weird in this video, or if it's half-baked, because I'm currently going through something right now, and, like, it's nothing too serious. I think I just caught something, and the back of my throat just hates me right now. Like, it's really hard to record some of these parts, and I just do not want to re-record them. But with all of that said and done, I'd like to thank you all for watching. Like always, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, share this around so I can grow the channel, leave some comments down below to make the algorithm happy, check out the Return to Skyland series in the description down below, along with the playlist for the Skylanders lore and the music in this video, and I will see you all in the next one.